I remember something about leukemia, and you're talking about when you started work, I guess you were just saying, with patients on leukemia, that it was really a death sentence. Is that correct? That over the course of your work with that, you started to get cures, but talking about childhood leukemia and
I never did any special research on leukemia, but when we came to Albuquerque, I came from a division of hematology at the University of Washington, which had 20 members, of which I was one, to a state which had 2 hematologists.
Wow.
One of which I was. So the other hematologist was at the Lovelace Clinic, and one of the advantages I had was I was with the university. I was no threat to the community, whereas a referral from a community physician to Lovelace often meant that they lost the patient. So as a result, I was able to had wonderful relationships with the community, got interesting referral patients not only from Albuquerque but from the entire state, and it led me to see what limitations we had in New Mexico and what those limitations needed to be fulfilled. You mentioned leukemia or the lymphomas. In order to treat those, you needed to have backup services such as blood transfusion, infectious disease backup, radiologic support, and radiation treatment, none of which were really readily available. So in the initial years, we send our patients with leukemia to either Seattle, which had excellent programs, including a development bone marrow transplant program, to Stanford, which was superb in radiotherapy, radiation therapy, to the NIH, which had experimental protocols for leukemia. So till we developed in Albuquerque backup for transfusion, infectious disease, and radiation therapy, we felt it was not in the patient's best interest to treat them in Albuquerque. On the other hand, we wanted to keep them as close to their family as we could. So we set up a program throughout the state to teach technologists to do the laboratory work and to do it in the way we could use and interpret it, so we could tell people from out of the city when they needed to come in, so they would be separated from their home as little as possible. Having no personal knowledge in the management of hematologic malignancies or oncology as such, one of my outstanding fellows, Jack Psyche, became interested in this. He was less interested in my studies of red cell metabolism, but was delighted when I suggested this possibility. And I'll just mention a little vignette about this, that I tried to get the then chairman of medicine to support Jack, who was a fellow who I had recruited, who is now an instructor in hematology, to take a leave of absence to go to MD Anderson in Texas to learn about the management of hematologic oncology malignancies. I couldn't get any money from the department to support him, so I got the idea that I knew an attorney in town, and I asked him if he had any wealthy widowers or widows who had no dependents, who might be interested in funding a young man to go to Albuquerque. and he identified a Mrs. Ladner for me who fit my needs, and I met with her Saturday mornings for probably a month or two explaining my program. And she liked to write poetry, but had difficulty getting them published. So I made a deal with her. I would get her poems published in a private book in return for her funding Dr. Psyche for 6 months to go to MD Anderson, to which she readily agreed. And so she gave us $18,000 to train Dr. Psyche. And we printed the book, a copy of which I have, and I listened to her poetry. And Jack Psyche loved the field. He became one of the favorite, probably won the outstanding teaching award more than anyone else at Albuquerque, has just celebrated his 40th anniversary there. He is now emeritus there, but became chief of oncology at this at the University of New Mexico Cancer Center, and he and I are in constant communication, and currently I have consulted with him on an illness that I have developed, and I'm dictating this in January 2011. Well, I think I've forgotten now what started this
we were talking.
diversion.
Because I was curious about the whole leukemia thing that I
Leukemia,
remembered
right.
something about it, but I didn't remember where in your career it was.
So we developed a leukemia program, a leukemia lymphoma program, and once Jack came back, we needed funding for that program, and we recruited a very nice man who was the husband of a patient with Hodgkin's disease, who both Jack and I managed for some time. She subsequently died of her disease, but her husband was very impressed with what we were doing and became a community recruiter for our lymphoma leukemia program, which Jack then took over after I moved in 1973 we moved from Albuquerque to Bethesda.
I hadn't realized until listening to this right now, really what a frontier, what a pioneer city in so many ways Albuquerque was in 1963-64 when you arrived. I didn't realize, the hospital was really, and the medical school was quite literally, a pioneer village almost, that it was starting from scratch. I had no idea. So it's pretty interesting.
It was, and I might add, do we have some? I might
We're
add
on.
a couple more. There's an episode in Albuquerque which is one of the saddest episodes of my professional career in terms of personal relationships. Dr. Papa, who recruited me, couldn't have been a better chairman for me. I never asked him for anything. He saw my needs before I did.
Wow.
He saw within about a year that I needed more lab space, which he said. He said also after about a year and a half, Ernie, you need a second person in your department.
And was that
and that was Dr. Hardy.
Oh, okay.
Bill Hardy, wonderful man. He was actually the hematologist from Loveless Clinic.
Okay.
And a wonderful teacher. And then at about 2.5 years after my arrival, there was a movement to remove the dean of the medical school, named Reginald Fitz. I liked him very much. I was not part of the activity to lead to his resignation, but subsequent to his resignation, I was appointed as one of 6 members of a search committee for a new dean. And the search committee was made up actually of 5 chairmen, 5 of the original chairmen. There was now a new chairman in obstetrics. I'm sorry, in pediatrics at that time. There were 6 members of the committee. I'm trying to recollect, there was an obstetrics and a pediatrics, but the pathology was not represented on this committee. It was appointed by the president of the university, a man named Hetty, and his instructions to the committee was, I want one recommendation, and you are allowed to have all the input you want, but you're not allowed to give any feedback to any of the sources that provide input. So I was part of this committee, and my responsibility was to represent the entire clinical medical department, not only the Department of Medicine. And now it turned out that we had several meetings, both of inside and outside candidates, and it became, I guess it became rumored that one of the favorite candidates was Dr. Robert Stone, the chairman of pathology. And that leaked out somehow, and I began to receive letters from Dr. Papper. What a tragedy and a disaster it would be if Dr. Robert Stone would be appointed dean. And I would receive letters from other department members recommending other people from Dr. Papper, whom I loved, other members, and long letters as to why Dr. Stone would not be suitable. Well, it turned out that one week I got 4 letters from the Department of Medicine, all of which used the term pivotal. It says that when a pivotal department objects to something, well, I didn't think the word pivotal would arise spontaneously in the minds of 4 different people, so I suspected where that originated. The bottom line was that we came down to a unanimous vote by 5 of the members, and I had a choice at that point to either make it 6 unanimous or to abstain. Mm-hmm. I chose to vote along with the other 6 because I believed he would be the best candidate. I knew what this would do to Dr. Papper, that he perceived me as representing him, mm-hmm. not representing all the clinical departments. Mm-hmm. And so it was one Friday afternoon when the announcement was made. I called Dr. Stone, I called Dr. Papper, and asked them to meet with me Saturday morning in my office to try to achieve a rapprochement between the two. Well, it didn't happen. So the following Wednesday, Dr. Papper resigned and moved to the University of Miami, where his brother, Dr. Papper, also was chairman of anesthesiology. I felt very bad by this. In retrospect, I suppose I could have abstained, but that was not my responsibility in the job. And here was a man who had recruited me, who had supported me, who had perceived my needs before I did. When he perceived the one time I could be of support to him, I did not do so. I was by that time on a hematology study section, and we had a meeting about 6 months after he left for Miami, and it happened to be outside of Miami. And so when I went there, I called his home. His wife, Renee, after whom Renee was named actually, who we loved, answered the phone. And I said, I was here and I was wondering how you were, and well, I might speak to Dr. Papper. And she says, well, Dr. Papper does not want to speak with you.
Wow.
And that hurt me a great deal, but in retrospect, thinking about it many years later, the problem was really with Dr. Papper, not with me. I carried out the duty which was assigned to me, and I had an obligation to the medical school to perform that duty to the best of my ability. There was another consequence. After Dr. Papper left, Dr. Arnold Greenhouse became acting chairman. And he and I had been good friends, and we had skied together, and there was a coldness or coolness that developed between us. And there was a coolness that developed between other members of the Department of Medicine and me. And I noticed that eyes would be averted when I walked down the hall and passed one. But things changed. After about 4 or 5 months, I got a letter from Dr. Greenhouse. He said, you did a very wise thing in having Dr. Robert Stone appointed a dean. He's turned out to be a superb dean, and we appreciate your role in that. And so relationships within the department and with Dr. Greenhouse improved, and it made me feel better. But it never erased the hurt that I felt between Dr. Papper and myself. Dr. Papper subsequently went to the University of Colorado. The week before he left, we actually in our department diagnosed an abnormality in his blood, which presaged his development of multiple myeloma, and he subsequently was in Colorado, wrote a lovely book on the ethics of medicine, but then passed away within several years.
And you really never had you never got a chance to...
I never had a chance
he never
to...
let you.
He did not want to establish a relationship. He did return to Albuquerque once to give a lecture, but it was a lecture at at one of the social clubs, which did not admit blacks, and I indicated I would not attend for that reason. Particularly one of our other friends, by then was chairman of obstetrics and gynecology, Dr. Henderson.
I was good friends with his daughter.
Friends of our daughters. And I would not attend a lecture at a organization that did not permit blacks. So much for that episode.
You said there was another one? Another episode that you...
Well, you asked the question about why we left Albuquerque to go to Bethesda. And would you like to talk about that?
Sure.
Hello, Carol. We're at January 6, 2011. And Carol asked me, how was it that we moved from Albuquerque to Bethesda in 1973, when I had told Carol many times how much I enjoyed Albuquerque, how much I enjoyed teaching, how much I enjoyed seeing my patients, how I liked being a full professor of medicine, that I had become on my 40th birthday. And so how come we left Albuquerque to go to Bethesda? Well, the story does start about June 1972, 3 years after my 40th birthday. And having become a full professor, I was entitled to a sabbatical. Although I had been in Albuquerque 9 years, it was the first time I was able to consider a sabbatical. And so I had arranged to work with a Dr. David Weiss in Jerusalem at Hadassah University, at Hadassah Hospital, the Hebrew University, and the Weizmann Institute, to learn about immunotherapy for cancer, a field which was just emerging. I was going to work with chickens and chicken eggs. And I spent 2 wonderful weeks in Jerusalem, and I have a trip report of that if anyone is interested. Part of that visit was to make arrangements where the 3 girls might learn Hebrew, and it would be on a moshav, and where we might live. But and I was fully committed to going to Jerusalem. But then in early fall, or actually I remember on coming back, I learned of 2 things. One was that there had been a Watergate break-in, and during my absence, so that would have been in June 1972. The other thing was that Congress has passed what was called the Kennedy-Rogers Health Act. And this was Ted Kennedy and Mr. Rogers, who I've forgotten what his first name is.
Not the guy on television.
No, no. And what the bill did was elevated the National Heart and Lung Institute, one of the institutes of the National Institutes of Health. In the bureaucratic jargon, it raised it one level in status, and it raised it to a bureau. There was only one other institute at the National Institutes of Health, which was a bureau, and that was the National Cancer Institute. What that meant was that divisions within the bureau, or the National Heart and Lung Institute, now had the status, the bureaucratic status of an institute. So directors of divisions of the Cancer Institute and directors of divisions of the National Heart and Lung Institute were the equivalent of institute directors at the National Institutes of Health. I didn't pay too much attention to that bill till I got a phone call from Ted Cooper, who was the head of the Heart and Lung Institute, telling me about the bill and asking me for recommendations who might be a director for that division. He gave me one name that I would have considered recommending, but he says, I don't want that name, I want some others. So I gave him probably 3 or 4 names and thought that was the end of it. And about 6 weeks later, I get a phone call. Ted Cooper, by the way, had been the chairman of pharmacology at UNM, and I had worked with him on a number of things. And so when he went first to head the artificial heart program at the National Heart and Lung Institute, and then became director. He was director at the time the institute was elevated to bureau status. So I got a call from him and said, Ernie, I would like you to consider that position. And at first I was kind of reluctant to do so, and I said I'd think about it. But in the meantime, something which I forgot to tell you was that the Heart and Lung Institute, the Kennedy-Rogers bill, had a couple of parts to the bill, requirements of the bill. It said that there would be a blood division created in this new bureau. So there would be 3 divisions, one for heart, one for lung, and one for blood. It further mandated that no less than 15% of the allocations for the institute be devoted to blood. But it also, I put into the blood division 3 separate programs that were established at NIH, National Institutes of Health. One dealt with hemophilia, another dealt with the sickle cell program, and the other with blood resources, or basically transfusion medicine. These were programs, all of which carried budgets, and that was to be included in that no less than 15%. It further required that a 5-year plan be established in each of the divisions as to what it hoped it would accomplish over the next 5 years. I had been appointed to the member of that committee to draft the 5-year plan, and so I became aware of the activities. At any rate, I flew into Bethesda for an interview, and it happened to be the night I arrived. I went to see a movie which was the disaster movie of the ship.
Titanic?
No.
Poseidon Adventure?
The Poseidon Adventure. And that night also was the massacre at the '72 Olympics.
Oh, wow.
For which I stayed up basically all night. And so I went sort of red-eyed for my interview the next day at NIH, but apparently did well enough so that the position was offered me. So I had to consider whether to accept it. And there were some downsides. The downsides I've already mentioned. It meant canceling the trip to Israel and a sabbatical. It meant giving up my, temporarily at least, my position as professor at UNM. And I did ask for and obtain permission to have a hematology clinic at George Washington University, and was appointed professor there and was able to go to hematology clinic there one afternoon a week, Wednesday afternoons. So I was able to keep up some clinical work. There were the most important part of the decision was that I was seduced. And I was seduced because when you write a plan or have a significant portion in writing the 5-year plan, it develops some incentive that you would like to have some significant part in trying to carry it out. There were some financial advantages also. I started UNM with a salary of $15,000 a year. That was in 1964. That was a raise from the $12,000 at University of Washington. And every year there was at UNM there was a certain percentage that the salary would increase. So, but that makes an initial salary of $15,000 limiting in terms of annual increases versus, say, a radiologist who comes in at $40,000 who gets the same percentage increase. So by the time '72 came around, I was making about $33,000, a little over $33,000 a year. The job at NIH, because of its level now, basically the division head in a bureau was equivalent to an institute director, and having kept my reserve commission in the Public Health Service, which was a two-striper, the equivalent of an Army captain, it now became a 4 stripes, the equivalent of an Army colonel or a Navy captain, with a salary, base salary of about $65,000.
Wow, doubling your salary.
$10,000 incentive for being an MD and having privileges at the commissary.
I remember going there.
And other advantages that go with a senior rank. There were both professional advantages. Maybe the most important was that the position, in a sense, gave a focus for blood at NIH. NIH being a world-recognized institution, gave the head of it, in a sense, a national presence and an international presence, which was attractive. And so I accepted the position, and we tried to sell our house in Albuquerque with little success, having bought it for $35,000 in
1964. 3 or 4.
And yes, it was 1961. We lived in it 2.5 years.
Oh, that's the Seattle house.
The Seattle house.
Uh-huh.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You said the Albuquerque house.
Oh, I'm sorry. Absolutely. The Seattle house for 35. Put it on the market. It stayed on the market for 14 months. Sold it for $31,500 because shortly before that time, the contract for the TFX airplane, which should have gone to Boeing, went to General Dynamics in Texas. So the joke was, not so funny, was the last one out of Seattle turned out the lights. In any case, 3 decades later, when I visited that area, that house had more recently sold for over $400,000.
Wow. How about the Albuquerque? But you were talking about the Albuquerque house?
No, this is the...
that was the Seattle house.
This is the Seattle house, which had a beautiful view of Lake Washington, and when the weather was right, of Mount Rainier.
That's what you were saying.
In any case, in late winter and early spring of 1973, we packed, the 6 of us at the time, into our 1970 Bel Air. The 6th person, of course, was our Cindy, and spent about 3 or 4 weeks traveling the southern route from Albuquerque via the Carlsbad Caverns, via New Orleans, via Atlanta, and to Bethesda.
I remember the cold weather and almost getting stuck. Was it in Louisiana?
That's right.
6 hours.
6 hours.
We were afraid we were going to run out of fuel in the car.
We got a snowstorm. The roads became closed. They opened the barriers between the east and west highway. We turned around and went to a motel in Baton Rouge, arriving there at 9:30 or 10 and having a few snacks and putting up Cindy.
Mm-hmm.
The story of that trip maybe we can deal with at the end because there's other aspects.
Excellent.
But it was a memorable trip.
Mm-hmm.
Arriving in Bethesda, Eve and I had taken a trip before and picked out a house. I think I picked out the house first, and then and the house cost let's see, that house. No, we're now skipping a little bit. From Albuquerque, we bought the house at $39,000, sold it at $56,000, and this house was $125,000 on Oak Forest Lane.
Mm-hmm.
And but we loved the house.
Mm-hmm.
And
I remember the huge map.
We have
in the
a
study.
huge map in the house, and we were told there was an Indian living at the corner of our street.
A redskin.
A redskin. And we thought that was a little offensive to call that, till we learned that the Washington football team were the Redskins.
You never heard that?
No, I don't think I did.
In any case, Carol and Lori were enrolled in a very good school in Bethesda, the Walt Whitman High School.
Well, actually, I started there at Pyle. I don't know if Lori was at Pyle also, because that was middle school.
And Renee went to a grammar school, and we were not surprised, but pleased that she was chosen for the gifted program. and was enrolled and loved it and made her friends. And through Renee, we made many friends of her classmates' parents. So that was part of that. So starting my new job in Bethesda in Building 4, I had a nice corner office and I made some early decisions. The people in the sickle cell branch were all on the 5th floor, and they were all blacks. And the people in the rest of the division that I inherited were all non-blacks on the 4th floor. So one of my first steps was to mix that up a little bit.
I didn't know that.
The second thing was I had to form an advisory committee to the blood program. And I chose more women for that committee than any other advisory committee up to that time. And that was a difficult job because the women who were appropriate were all in demand from many other organizations. So to pick some that were able to come was a challenge, but very worthwhile. And again, I was able to have as chairman of the advisory committee to the division my old mentor, Clement A. Finch.
Yeah.
So within about 6 months, another bill had been passed by Congress, or perhaps it was an executive order, but it was that under Nixon, who was president at the time, the State Department had developed an exchange program with the Soviet Union. It was run by the State Department, and the Soviets had the privilege of choosing which area in medicine they wanted to collaborate in. And the area of blood transfusion and hepatitis was chosen by them, and not because of any particular knowledge on my part, but because of the place I had in the government. I was appointed the coordinator of the U.S. team that would be part of the coordination. Part of that team was Lou Barker, who was the director of the blood division of the Food and Drug Administration. And he was a very valuable member of that team, and his value became even more evident, which I will get to in a little while.